Welcome to today's episode of History's Greatest Battles, Season 2, where we explore history's greatest sieges. If you know anybody that enjoys this genre of history, please share the podcast with them. In the summer of 1982, in the shattered streets of the Middle East, soldiers and guerrilla fighters waged one of the most intense urban battles of the late 20th century. Men on both sides faced unrelenting bombardment, close quarters combat, and the grim sight of civilians caught in the crossfire. It was a battle defined by brutality and desperation, where ideology and geopolitics collided with the realities of war. This siege escalated from mere military objectives into a battle for simple survival. The combatants saw friends killed beside them, fought through rubble that had once been homes, and carried the weight of decisions that would alter history. The aftermath of this siege reshaped the Middle East, creating power vacuums that led to the rise of new militant groups and further entrenching the divisions that fuel today's violence in Gaza. The events that unfolded during this siege and the decisions made by key players on both sides didn't end with the evacuation of the PLO or the withdrawal of Israeli forces. They set the stage for decades of violence, political upheaval, and the ongoing struggle for control in one of the world's most volatile regions. Today's siege was a turning point in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It marked the first time an Arab capital came under direct attack by the Israeli military, shattering the illusion of invincibility for the PLO and forcing its leadership into exile. But exile didn't weaken the cause, it globalized it. The PLO's displacement to Tunis fragmented its operations, but also opened doors for new forms of resistance. Meanwhile, Lebanon descended into further chaos, and power vacuums emerged that would later be filled by groups like Hezbollah, which continue to play a central role in the region's conflicts. This siege isn't just history, it's the foundation for the political and military dynamics that still dominate the Middle East today. As we speak, the recent war in Gaza echoes the lessons of 1982. The division over who bears the moral high ground, Israel or Palestinian groups like Hamas, remains as contentious as ever. The seeds of this division were sown during that siege, when the international community witnessed in real time the devastating cost of war on civilians. Today's headlines of blockades, civilian casualties, and ideological deadlocks trace a direct line back to the siege we'll explore. Understanding the siege of Beirut in 1982 isn't just about military strategy and battlefield tactics. It's about grasping how the decisions of the past shape the world we live in today. Understanding why the Middle East remains a cauldron of tension and why the world is so polarized on this issue requires understanding today's siege. Let's now experience the Siege of Beirut.
Welcome to History's Greatest Battles, Season 2, Episode 4, The Siege of Beirut, the 14th of June through the 21st of August, 1982. Israeli forces, roughly 30,000 soldiers. Palestinian forces, roughly 15,000 soldiers. The occupation of Beirut successfully forced the Palestine Liberation Organization to relocate its headquarters out of Lebanon. However, it failed to deliver the lasting security for northern Israel that its architects had envisioned. The conflict's unresolved tensions have carried forward, contributing to the continued violence and instability in the region that persists to this day.
In the late 1960s, the Palestine Liberation Organization, or the PLO, found itself ejected from Jordan, driven out by a bitter conflict with the ruling regime that could no longer stomach its presence. Yasser Arafat, the PLO's unyielding leader, shifted his operations to Beirut, Lebanon, a city already teetering under tensions. From there, his forces orchestrated a series of violent raids and attacks, planting seeds of destruction that would echo far beyond the Lebanese borders. The Lebanese government, crippled by internal divisions and too feeble to confront the PLO's activities, turned to regional powers for intervention. In November 1969, Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser presided over a decisive meeting, one that produced the Cairo Agreement, a pact of grim compromise. Under the terms of this agreement, the PLO was granted virtually unchecked freedom to operate out of Lebanon, while the Lebanese people were left exposed, their security hanging by a thread against the certainty of Israeli retaliation. By 1975, Lebanon had plunged into chaos as a brutal civil war erupted between Christian and Muslim factions. The fighting drew the attention of Arab nations, culminating in the deployment of 30,000 so-called peacekeeping troops, a force comprised of contingents from Syria, Sudan, Saudi Arabia, Yemen, and the UAE. With 2/3 of these troops hailing from Syria, it was no surprise that the Syrians quickly emerged as the dominant force in Lebanon. Together with the PLO, they established a firm grip on the nation, tightening control with each passing day. In southern Lebanon, the PLO entrenched itself with artillery positions and rocket batteries, relentlessly pounding northern Israeli settlements while conducting audacious cross-border raids. From late 1981 into mid-1982, a fragile UN-brokered ceasefire kept the guns momentarily silent, though few believed this uneasy calm would last. By mid-1982, Israel had made its decision. Diplomacy had failed. Only an invasion of Lebanon could deliver the security they sought. The offensive began with thunderous artillery barrages and precision airstrikes on June 4th, followed by the entry of ground forces on June 6th. Israel's objectives were bold, and its goals clear. First, to drive the PLO far enough north that their rockets and artillery would no longer threaten Israeli towns. Second, to avoid direct confrontation with the Syrian military, though few believed that could truly be achieved. And third, to shatter the chains of foreign influence over Lebanon, restoring its sovereignty and political independence. The operation carried the name Peace for Galilee, a title heavy with irony for those who witnessed the destruction it unleashed. Israel's ambitions extended far beyond securing southern Lebanon. They sought nothing less than the utter defeat of the PLO, a blow that would cripple its influence in the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, territories that had remained under Israeli control since the decisive 1967 war. As the invasion unfolded, Israel was finalizing the historic handover of the Sinai Peninsula to Egypt. This act of diplomacy stood in stark contrast to their military offensive, but Israel was determined to project unwavering strength, signaling to the world that its resolve to secure its existence was absolute. The Israeli invasion force, a formidable army of 90,000 troops, struck Lebanon on 3 fronts. One spearhead surged up the coastal highway toward Beirut. Another cut inland, driving to sever the vital Beirut-Damascus road. Meanwhile, an eastern thrust unfurled in multiple directions, seeking to immobilize or cut off Syrian reinforcements before they could tip the scales. Israel's stated intent to avoid direct conflict with Syrian forces unless provoked was a hollow promise. The battlefield left little room for restraint, and bloodshed between the two was all but inevitable. The so-called safe zone Israel sought to secure extended 25 miles into Lebanon, encompassing parts of the southern Bekaa Valley, a region firmly held by a volatile mix of Syrian and PLO forces. Though Syria had no appetite for a full-scale war in Lebanon, the eruption of skirmishes was unavoidable. In just 3 days, the Israeli Air Force swept Syrian aircraft from the skies, obliterating their anti-air defenses and seizing total control of the airspace, a dominance that would define the campaign. Facing overwhelming odds and no prospect of outside support, Syria reluctantly sued for a ceasefire. It came into effect on June 11th in the east, yet Israeli forces pressed their assault westward, hammering PLO positions with relentless fury. Arafat's fighters, battered and outmaneuvered, abandoned Tyre and Sidon, retreating to Beirut, a final bastion where they prepared to make their stand. By June 11th, Israeli forces had advanced to the outskirts of Beirut, establishing contact with the Lebanese Front, a Christian militia led by the ambitious presidential candidate Bashir Jumail. Israel appeared to bank on Jumail's forces to wage a decisive campaign against the PLO, yet aligning openly with the Israelis was a perilous gamble for him, one that could fracture his political standing among the Lebanese populace. Within Arafat's ranks, a patchwork of fighters from Muslim Lebanese militias bolstered the PLO's defenses. adding layers of complexity to an already chaotic battlefield. A prolonged siege was never part of Israel's strategy. Their plan demanded a swift and decisive blow. Anything less would jeopardize the perception of overwhelming victory. Defending Beirut was a monumental challenge for the PLO, but Arafat had another weapon at his disposal: time. As U.S. envoy Philip Habib worked feverishly to negotiate peace, every day Arafat's forces held out added weight to his position at the bargaining table. The Israelis faced a grueling challenge. A siege is never swift, and despite launching wave after wave of assault on PLO strongholds, none of the attacks delivered a decisive blow. For 7 agonizing weeks, the Israelis fought inch by bloody inch, seizing the airport and parts of the southern suburbs of West Beirut, the heart of the city's Muslim quarters. Progress came slowly and at a high cost. Relentless bombardment rained down from land, sea, and air, reducing large swaths of Beirut to smoldering ruins. The power grid was severed, and food and water supplies collapsed, leaving civilians and fighters alike to endure unimaginable suffering. Despite the onslaught, key strategic points of Beirut remained firmly under PLO control. Access to the port, the heights where the Kuwaiti embassy stood, and significant stretches of the seafront. Elsewhere, Israel claimed substantial victories. Their forces secured the Beirut-Damascus highway and seized control of key towns, dominating the high ground of central Lebanon, cementing their strategic advantage. Yet the siege itself became their undoing. Arafat's shifting tactics, veering between obstinacy and faint concessions, sowed confusion among negotiators. For the Israelis, this unpredictability, compounded by relentless American pressure to settle diplomatically, left them off balance. After weeks of fraught negotiations, U.S. envoy Philip Habib achieved what had seemed impossible: an agreement. By August the 7th, Syria had signed on, followed in the days after by the Lebanese government, the PLO, the Israeli cabinet, and President Ronald Reagan himself on August the 18th. On August the 21st, PLO fighters began their retreat, departing Beirut by sea as French peacekeepers arrived to secure the city. Days later, on August the 25th, U.S. Marines landed, and by August the 30th, Arafat himself boarded a ship bound for Greece. When the guns finally fell silent, the toll was staggering. According to Lebanese government estimates, 17,825 people lay dead, Lebanese, Palestinian, and Syrian civilians caught in the inferno. The Red Cross reported an additional 30,000 displaced, their homes and lives shattered beyond recognition. Israel, for its part, acknowledged over 300 dead and 2,000 wounded among its ranks, while boasting the elimination of 1,000 PLO guerrillas and the capture of 6,000 more. On September the 7th, Israeli forces withdrew from Beirut, yet their presence in southern Lebanon remained, entrenched in alliance with local militias, a presence that would endure until the year 2000. Though the PLO no longer operated out of Beirut, it remained far from the crushing defeat Israel had envisioned. The organization reestablished its headquarters in Tunis, while its units maintained operations across Algeria, Iraq, Jordan, Sudan, and Yemen, keeping the struggle alive. PLO remnants also held positions in eastern Lebanon, which soon became the target of Israel's next assault in early September of 1982. As Syrian forces pulled back eastward, Israel struck hard, targeting armored convoys and anti-aircraft installations in the Bekaa Valley with precision and with fury. Despite the scale of their invasion, Israel's ultimate objective, freedom from terrorist attacks, remained unfulfilled. The mission in its primary aim was a failure. Thus, in the early 1980s, Israel's leadership staunchly opposed acknowledging the Palestine Liberation Organization as a legitimate political entity. However, by the late 1990s, both parties had progressed to direct negotiations concerning political recognition and statehood, offering a faint hope for resolution. Yet as we stand in January of 2025, the landscape has dramatically shifted. The recent 15-month conflict between Israel and Hamas has devastated the Gaza Strip, resulting in over 46,600 deaths and displacing 90% of its population. A fragile ceasefire, brokered by international mediators, has been established, leading to the exchange of hostages and prisoners. Despite this, the path to lasting peace remains fraught with challenges, as internal political dynamics and the monumental task of rebuilding Gaza's shattered infrastructure test the resilience and the commitment of all parties involved.